A multi-million-dollar resort, the dream of the ambitious, rises on ownerless land, but beneath its glittering facade lies a chilling secret, a plot meticulously woven by a mysterious former agent. He watched, he waited, as every brick was laid. When the doors open, he won't be welcoming guests, but serving an eviction notice. You won't believe this spectacular takedown. Don't miss what happens next. Stephanie Ward, director of the Homeowners Association HOA for a rapidly expanding resort community, always considered herself a visionary. She possessed a keen eye for potential, a steely mind for negotiation, and an almost blind tenacity in pursuing her goals. But it was that very tenacity, that unwavering self-belief that she was always right, that sowed the seeds of her downfall. That abandoned basin, she declared in an enthusiastic HOA board meeting, is an untapped gold mine. It belongs to no one. It's dead land, waiting to be brought to life. Her words echoed in the luxurious boardroom, where board members, potential investors, and a team of construction engineers listened intently. None of them doubted. None probed deeper. They only saw opportunity. Millions of potential dollars vanishing into thin air if they didn't act quickly. The basin Stephanie referred to lay a few miles from the edge of the burgeoning community, a natural scar on the arid landscape, deemed worthless by most. Its terrain was rugged, a mix of rocky outcrops, thorny scrub, and a creek that ran dry in the harsh summer months. Most people passing by saw it as a wild, untamed expanse, unsuitable for any purpose beyond sheltering wildlife. But Stephanie, with the foresight of an architect and developer, envisioned something else: a high-end luxury resort, an oasis of opulence with infinity pools, world-class golf courses, five-star restaurants, and a state-of-the-art spa complex. She painted a vivid picture of international tourists flocking in, of surrounding property values soaring, of her and the HOA's prestige elevated to new heights. Her ambition wasn't just to build a resort, it was to build an empire. "We need to act fast," Stephanie emphasized, tapping a vibrant 3D rendering projected onto the large screen. No one seems to have managed it for decades. Local records show it as unclassified land, a legal term suggesting it could be claimed for common use, or in our case, developed with community consensus. She had hired a team of lawyers, but their due diligence, rushed by Stephanie's urgency and the investors' impatience, didn't delve deep enough. They missed the subtle details, the hidden cracks in an antiquated and complex bureaucratic system where archaic documents could be buried under decades of paper and faded electronic records. What they found only provided evidence for the abandonment Stephanie wished to hear. But the land was far from abandoned. It belonged to Logan Reeve, a former asset investigation agent who had turned his expertise in uncovering hidden assets into a personal tool of power. He was a phantom in the world of real estate transactions, a man concealed behind a labyrinth of shell corporations and trusts. He had acquired that basin years ago, not for its immediate value, but for a deep understanding of its geological potential and its strategic location relative to underground water sources. He had quietly observed the adjacent community's development, like a patient predator waiting for its prey to make a mistake. Logan knew Stephanie's plans long before she announced them. His information network was extensive, including former colleagues within government agencies who provided intelligence on local planning meetings and upcoming public filings. He had received a preliminary copy of Stephanie's resort proposal before it was ever presented to the HOA board. Initially, there was a jolt, a cold anger as he recognized Stephanie's brazenness. "Dead land, unmanaged," he murmured in his highly secure office, his eyes scanning a cadastral map displaying his clearly marked property lines. She's about to learn that ownerless is a very relative concept. Logan's decision was not a spontaneous reaction. It was a cold, precise calculation. As a former agent, he understood the law inside and out, especially the loopholes and ambiguous regulations that could be exploited. He embarked on a subtle, legal campaign to adjust the land ownership maps. He wasn't changing the actual ownership. He was making it nearly impossible to detect for those not specifically trained or with access to the deepest levels of public records. He used complex trust accounts, business entities registered in different states, and legal processes to obscure the trail, making the basin, on the surface, appear as a gray area of ambiguous ownership. He wanted it to look abandoned to those who didn't look deep enough, and no one looked deep enough except Logan. He also began deploying a sophisticated network of civilian reconnaissance cameras throughout the basin. The tiny, perfectly camouflaged cameras, solar-powered and transmitting data via satellite, recorded every activity. From the initial visits of surveyors to the arrival of massive bulldozers, everything was documented. He had photographs of construction engineers surveying the terrain, videos of workers clearing brush, even remote audio recordings of casual conversations about this ownerless land. Everything was stored on a secure, multi-layered encrypted server, awaiting the opportune moment. Construction of the resort proceeded at a furious pace. Giant billboards sprang up, proclaiming the arrival of Oasis Serenity, a name Logan found ironically amusing. He received weekly updates from his real estate legal team, who were also working in the shadows, preparing the complex legal filings for a potential lawsuit. They ensured that every step taken by Stephanie and the HOA was meticulously tracked, every misstep in paperwork, every minor infraction recorded. The local planning agency, overwhelmed by the project's scale and likely influenced by donations from Stephanie's investors, fast-tracked the plans, barely scrutinizing the land ownership details they should have. They neglected their duty. Logan's lead attorney, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, had stated in a conference call, "It's a significant oversight which will benefit us when the time comes." As the first steel frames rose, then the walls, the roofs, Logan remained composed. He did not intervene, send warning letters, or issue legal threats. His silence was more menacing than any words. He wanted them to invest everything, their time, effort, reputation, and most importantly, tens of millions of dollars. He wanted them to build a masterpiece on his land, a valuable work of art that would ultimately belong to him. He knew the more money they poured in, the more effort they expended, the greater the shock would be when they lost everything. This was not just a legal battle, it was a lesson in hubris, a retribution for the careless and the arrogant. And then, the project was almost complete. The pools were filled with sparkling water. The golf course stretched out, lush and green. The restaurants fully furnished with luxurious interiors. Local newspapers began to rave about the region's new jewel, praising Stephanie Ward as a visionary and bringer of prosperity. Those accolades only deepened Logan's cold satisfaction. It was time. The moment he, the silent trespassed upon, would reveal his true ownership. The grand opening gala for Oasis Serenity was set for a Friday evening in late autumn. Invitations, embossed with shimmering gold foil, had been sent to local dignitaries, prominent investors, and a select list of high-net-worth individuals. Stephanie Ward, in a dazzling emerald gown, was everywhere at once, a whirlwind of confident smiles and triumphant gestures. She greeted guests, posed for photographs with beaming investors, and occasionally cast a proprietary gaze over the sprawling, illuminated grounds. The air thrummed with excitement, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the murmur of impressed voices. This was her moment, the culmination of years of relentless ambition. She envisioned herself accepting accolades, perhaps even a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Chamber of Commerce. The press, eager for a feel-good story about local development, had dedicated entire spreads to the resort, lauding its opulent design and the speed of its construction. They called Stephanie a titan of industry, a game changer for the region. Logan watched it all, not from the lavish ballroom, but from the sterile glow of multiple monitors in his control room. A glass of water his only accompaniment, the cameras, now strategically placed to capture the entire spectacle, streamed crisp, real-time footage. Every triumphant toast, every back-patting handshake, every beaming smile of self-congratulation was meticulously recorded. He had orchestrated the timing with surgical precision. The legal filings were complete, submitted quietly through a labyrinth of electronic channels, designed to land on the courthouse docket at the precise moment of maximum impact. His legal team, led by Eleanor Vance, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a steel-trap mind and a ruthless efficiency, was poised. Eleanor had informed him that the local court system, like many, relied heavily on automated systems for initial processing. By filing at an off-peak hour, the system would process the comprehensive injunction and lawsuit without immediate human review, ensuring it would appear on the morning docket as a fait accompli. This would give them a crucial head start before Stephanie's legal team, likely still recovering from the previous night's festivities, could react. The first hint of trouble came not from the grand ballroom, but from a subtle shift in the atmosphere at the local planning agency in the county records office. A junior clerk, diligently cross-referencing property deeds, stumbled upon a series of seemingly innocuous updates to the basin's land registry that, when pieced together, painted a vastly different picture of ownership. The system, designed to flag major changes, had been cleverly bypassed by Logan's legal maneuvers, which had involved a series of smaller, perfectly legitimate, yet cumulatively misleading, adjustments over several years. The clerk, bewildered, brought it to a supervisor, who then escalated it to a department head. A ripple of unease began to spread through the bureaucratic channels, a silent alarm bell that only those intimately familiar with the county's archaic systems could hear. Simultaneously, a series of anonymous tips, carefully planted by Logan's secondary team of operatives, began to hit the inboxes of investigative journalists at the region's most prominent newspapers. These weren't overt accusations, but rather subtle suggestions of unusual land transactions and potential irregularities in resort development permits. The tips were vague enough to pique curiosity, but pointed enough to direct the journalists to the very same land records that the county clerk was now scrutinizing. Logan wasn't just planning a lawsuit, he was orchestrating a public relations blitz, ensuring that the story would break simultaneously from both the legal and media fronts. He wanted to ensure that Stephanie's carefully constructed narrative of triumph would be shattered in the most public and humiliating way possible. The morning after the gala, while Stephanie was likely still basking in the glow of her supposed success, a flurry of activity erupted. The county planning agency, now fully aware of the discrepancy in the land records, issued an immediate stop work order, a purely symbolic gesture given the resort's completion, but a devastating blow to its impending operational launch. This order was followed by a formal letter from Logan's legal team, served directly to the HOA and all named investors, announcing the lawsuit for trespass, illegal construction, and claiming full ownership of all structures built on the land. The sheer volume and complexity of the legal documentation alone were enough to overwhelm Stephanie's unprepared legal counsel. Eleanor had ensured that every potential avenue of defense was preemptively blocked, every legal precedent meticulously cited. The initial reactions were a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Stephanie, upon receiving the summons, initially laughed. "This is preposterous," she shrieked into the phone at her lead attorney, a man whose expertise lay more in corporate mergers than complex land disputes. "Some squatter trying to shake us down, just make it go away." But as her attorney began to delve into the meticulously prepared filings, his laughter quickly died. Logan's team hadn't just filed a lawsuit, they had built an impenetrable fortress of legal evidence, a historical record of ownership that dated back decades, layered beneath the very unclassified status that Stephanie had so confidently relied upon. The adjusted land maps, seemingly innocent on their own, now revealed a clear, continuous chain of title leading directly to Logan Reeve, through a series of cleverly structured holding companies, all legally sound. The twist, the cruel escalation of Logan's scheme, began to reveal itself. It wasn't just about recovering his land, it was about claiming the entire resort. The legal theory was audacious under specific precedents in American property law, particularly doctrines concerning adverse possession and improvements made in bad faith or without proper title. Structures built on land without the true owner's consent could, in certain circumstances, revert to the landowner. Logan's lawyers argued that Stephanie's team, through their negligent due diligence, had acted in willful disregard of established property rights. They had actively chosen to ignore or overlook the true ownership, thereby forfeiting any claim to the improvements made. Meanwhile, the local press, following the anonymous tips, quickly picked up on the story. Headlines blared, "Million-dollar resort built on mystery land. Developer's dream. Landowner's nightmare." Investigative journalists, armed with Logan's carefully curated leads, quickly uncovered the discrepancies in the county records. The narrative shifted dramatically. Stephanie Ward, once hailed as a visionary, was now portrayed as either dangerously incompetent or recklessly negligent. The irony was palpable. She had prided herself on her sharp business acumen, but now stood accused of a blunder of monumental proportions. The impact on Stephanie and her surroundings was immediate and devastating. Investors, previously jubilant, turned on her with a vengeance. Urgent, frantic calls flooded her office. Board meetings became shouting matches. The engineers, who had proudly overseen the construction, suddenly found themselves embroiled in a legal quagmire, their professional reputations at risk. Public confidence in the HOA, once a symbol of community progress, crumbled. Reservation lines for Oasis Serenity went silent. The lavish grand opening party became a symbol of hubris, a celebration on stolen ground. Logan, observing it all from his detached perch, felt a grim satisfaction. This was not revenge born of petty anger, but of cold, calculated justice. Stephanie had, in her arrogance, believed she could simply take what she wanted. She had disregarded the fundamental principles of property rights, scoffed at due diligence, and allowed ambition to overshadow ethics. He had simply allowed her to build her own gilded cage, brick by expensive brick, on his property. The true nature of his game, the long, patient wait, the meticulous preparation, and the devastating precision of his attack, was now laid bare for all to see. The ball was now in Stephanie's court, but it was a ball Logan had already punctured, ensuring it would never bounce her way again. The courtroom showdown loomed, promising to be the ultimate stage for his calculated victory. The courtroom, a solemn chamber carved from dark wood and hushed acoustics, felt less like a space of justice and more like a crucible under the unblinking gaze of Judge Harrison. Her face, a roadmap of carved lines and resolute purpose, offered no hint of sympathy, only an unwavering commitment to the statutes before her. Stephanie Ward. Once the picture of polished confidence, was now a fractured reflection of her former self. Her emerald gown, still in her wardrobe, felt like a relic from another lifetime. Today, she wore a somber suit, her posture rigid, her eyes darting between her lead attorney, a man named Thomas Sterling whose face was etched with growing anxiety, and the inscrutable figure of Logan Reeves seated calmly beside Eleanor Vance. The air was thick with tension, punctuated only by the soft rustle of legal papers and the hushed whispers of the press gallery. The HOA's defense, spearheaded by Sterling, was a desperate attempt to grasp at straws. They painted a picture of industrious developers, misled by ambiguous public records in a genuinely confusing legal landscape. "Your Honor," Sterling's voice boomed, laced with a plea that bordered on desperation. "My clients, reputable investors and community leaders, acted in what they genuinely believed to be good faith. The county's own records, labeling this land unclassified, were a tangled web of inconsistencies. How could they, ordinary citizens, be expected to untangle a legal Gordian knot that even seasoned professionals struggle with?" He brought forth a parade of expert witnesses, retired land surveyors, obscure historians of local property law, and even a former county clerk, all testifying to the baffling complexity of historical land deeds in that particular region. They argued that Logan's ownership, while perhaps technically valid, was so deeply buried and obscure as to be practically undiscoverable by any reasonable due diligence. They even attempted to turn the narrative, subtly implying Logan was a predatory, manipulative figure who had intentionally laid a trap, waiting for their significant investment before pouncing. But Eleanor Vance, Logan's lead attorney, possessed a calmness that was unnerving, a strategic poise that bespoke absolute certainty. She moved with an economy of motion, each gesture deliberate, every word a precisely aimed arrow. She began by systematically dismantling their good faith argument. "Your Honor," Eleanor began, her voice clear and resonant, "my client, Mr. Logan Reeve, has consistently and meticulously paid property taxes on this land for over 3 decades, linking each payment to a complex yet perfectly legal network of holding companies." She projected digital copies of tax receipts dating back to the early 1990s, each bearing the discrete marks of Logan's corporate entities. "These payments," she emphasized, "were not hidden. They are public record. Furthermore, Mr. Reeve engaged in consistent, if discreet, maintenance of his property, environmental monitoring, boundary marker reinforcement, and regular site visits. These are not the actions of an absentee owner, but of a vigilant and responsible landowner." Then came the true revelation, the masterstroke of Logan's meticulous planning. Eleanor unveiled the series of strategic, legal adjustments Logan had made to the land's public record. These weren't overt changes, but a series of perfectly legitimate, albeit intricately layered, filings of easements, rights of way, and obscure title transfers through shell corporations. Each legal maneuver, executed over years with surgical precision, made the true ownership trail progressively more opaque to the casual or even moderately diligent search, without actually breaking a single law. "My client," Eleanor stated, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the courtroom, "did not conceal his ownership. He merely exercised his right to structure his assets in a complex, yet entirely lawful, manner. It is not his responsibility to simplify his affairs for negligent parties who failed to conduct proper due diligence. The information was always there, accessible to those who dared to look beyond the surface." The digital screens in the courtroom then flickered to life, displaying what could only be described as the most damning evidence. Logan had held back these cinematic pieces, waiting for the opportune moment, for the absolute peak of the HOA's self-righteous indignation. Video after video played, crisp and undeniable, showing Stephanie Ward herself, along with key investors and construction engineers, physically on the property during initial surveys, animated discussions, and even the ceremonial groundbreaking. The audio, digitally enhanced and chillingly clear, captured their conversations about the land being free and clear, about no owner in sight. In one particularly devastating clip, taken during a celebratory toast on what was ostensibly the resort's completed main plaza, Stephanie, champagne flute in hand, beamed at her investors and declared, "To our foresight, foreseeing opportunity where others saw only empty land." A collective gasp rippled through the public gallery, and Stephanie herself visibly recoiled, her hand trembling as if struck. "These are not the actions of parties acting in good faith, Your Honor." Eleanor's voice, now subtly imbued with a controlled passion, resonated through the silence. "This is a pattern of willful disregard for property rights, driven by reckless ambition. They chose to ignore the red flags, to rush through due diligence, and to build a multi-million-dollar enterprise on land they had no legal right to touch. My client provided ample opportunity for them to discover the truth, if only they had bothered to look beyond their own greed and shortcuts." The legal bombshell that followed was the core of Logan's strategy, the application of the doctrine of accession and the principles governing property improvements made without consent. Eleanor meticulously cited decades of legal precedents where structures built on another's land without proper title or in bad faith could be forfeited to the landowner. "The defendants," she stated, her finger pointing with precise intent towards Stephanie, "made these improvements at their own peril. They gambled on a flawed understanding of ownership and lost." Under established precedent, these structures, having become fixtures to the land, now accrue to the rightful owner. They built a palace on another man's foundation, and that foundation now claims the palace. This declaration sent a visible shockwave through the court. Stephanie's attorneys scrambled, their earlier confidence replaced by palpable panic. Thomas Sterling, his face pale, cited cases for unjust enrichment and pleaded for substantial compensation for his client's immense investment. "Your Honor, this would be a manifest injustice," he implored, his voice cracking with desperation. "My clients invested their life savings, their professional reputations, years of tireless work to allow this. This predatory maneuver would be an affront to justice, a chilling precedent that discourages all legitimate development." But Logan, through Eleanor, had anticipated this plea for sympathy. Eleanor presented detailed financial analyses, projecting the exorbitant profits Stephanie and the investors stood to gain from Oasis Serenity. She contrasted this with Logan's long-term, modest, and completely legal investment in the barren land. She demonstrated that their investment was not a charitable act, but a calculated, high-risk venture taken without proper foundational research, a risk that had spectacularly backfired. Furthermore, Logan's comprehensive surveillance footage, previously used for proving trespass, now revealed more insidious details, instances of egregious environmental damage during the construction process, blatant breaches of zoning regulations that had been overlooked by the hurried local planning agency, and even some questionable labor practices that Logan's team had quietly documented. These findings, now laid bare in open court, further eroded the HOA's image as responsible developers, painting them as not just negligent, but morally bankrupt. The local planning agency, already reeling from the public scrutiny and facing potential lawsuits for their glaring negligence, was forced to admit their monumental oversight. Their internal review, prompted by Logan's strategically timed anonymous tips to the media and his subsequent lawsuit, uncovered severe deficiencies in their permit approval process for Oasis Serenity. One, a high-ranking official, was quietly and swiftly removed, and the agency issued a public apology for its failure to adequately scrutinize the land deeds. This admission, though carefully worded, provided further damning evidence against the HOA, reinforcing the notion that they had operated in a vacuum of due diligence, seemingly aided by bureaucratic incompetence. The media, initially captivated by the visionary developer narrative, now feasted voraciously on the unfolding drama. Reporters filled the courtroom, their pens scratching furiously, their camera flashes briefly illuminating the grim faces of the defendants. The story of the silent landowner, who had patiently watched his land transformed into a luxury resort by unwitting trespassers, captured the public imagination. Logan was portrayed as a quiet strategist, a master of foresight, a modern-day Machiavelli who played the long game. Stephanie, conversely, became the embodiment of reckless ambition, her earlier accolades turning into bitter mockery. The headline screamed, "Resort ripped from developers, silent owners stunning victory looms. Hubris haunts HOA, million-dollar blunder exposed. Oasis Serenity becomes oasis of despair." The shift in power was undeniable, brutal in its efficiency. Stephanie, once lauded, now faced not only the catastrophic loss of the resort, but also the very real prospect of personal bankruptcy, a barrage of lawsuits from furious investors, and the complete obliteration of her professional reputation. Her support network, once vast and influential, crumbled like dust. The engineers and contractors, who had initially stood by her, began to distance themselves with alarming speed, fearing legal repercussions and irreparable damage to their own businesses. Even the public, which had initially celebrated the resort, now viewed Stephanie with a mixture of suspicion and schadenfreude. The meticulously crafted image of Oasis Serenity as a beacon of luxury began to warp, becoming a symbol of a brazen, costly, and utterly humiliating mistake in a desperate, last-ditch effort to salvage something, anything. Stephanie's legal team approached Logan with a settlement proposal, a colossal buyout of his land, or a joint venture where he would become a major, controlling partner. They offered astronomical sums, far exceeding the initial value of the barren land, sums that would have made any other landowner wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. But Logan, through Eleanor, refused without a moment's hesitation. "My client is not interested in partnership," Eleanor stated firmly, her voice echoing the finality of Logan's decision. "Nor is he interested in a partial settlement. He seeks full legal remedy for trespass and illegal construction, which, under the law, includes the complete ownership of the structures built on his property. This is not a negotiation. It is a rectification." The refusal was a clear, chilling signal. Logan was not seeking a quick profit, nor was he interested in compromise. He sought total victory, a complete reclamation of what was rightfully his, built up at his opponent's ruinous expense. The battle had reached its undeniable climax, and the final judgment loomed, promising to solidify the dramatic and complete shift in fortune. The final day of the trial dawned with an oppressive weight, a hush falling over the usually bustling courthouse as if the building itself held its breath. Every seat in the gallery was taken, overflow rooms were packed, and a caravan of news vans idled outside, their satellite dishes aimed skyward. The anticipation was electric, the air thick with the promise of a verdict that would reverberate far beyond the confines of the courtroom. Stephanie Ward arrived looking gaunt, her usual meticulously styled hair now slightly disheveled, her eyes hollow, haunted by the specter of ruin. She gripped a crumpled tissue, her gaze fixed on the imposing figure of Judge Harrison. Logan Reeve entered with Eleanor Vance, his expression still unreadable, a quiet intensity in his eyes that spoke of patient vindication. He did not seek out Stephanie's gaze. His focus remained solely on the unfolding legal drama. Judge Harrison, her voice devoid of inflection, began to deliver her ruling. She meticulously reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, dissecting the arguments with surgical precision. She acknowledged the complexities of the land records, but unequivocally found that Logan Reeve had maintained continuous, legitimate, and discoverable ownership through all legal means. She cited the clear and consistent tax payments, the legally structured corporate entities, and the meticulously filed, albeit obscure, adjustments to the land registry. While the defense argues obfuscation, Judge Harrison stated, her gaze sweeping over Sterling's slumped form, the court finds that Mr. Reeve merely utilized the full extent of the law to manage his assets. It is not the burden of a landowner to simplify their ownership or for the convenience of others, especially when those others engage in perfunctory due diligence fueled by overzealous ambition. The judge then turned to the damning surveillance footage. She described, in chilling detail, the videos and audio recordings that unequivocally showed Stephanie Ward and the HOA leadership discussing the land as ownerless and proceeding with construction despite the clear lack of definitive title. This evidence, the judge declared, her voice gaining a resonant firmness, demonstrates a pattern of reckless disregard bordering on willful ignorance for established property rights. The defendants chose to gamble on the assumption of abandonment, and that gamble has proven to be an egregious miscalculation. Finally, Judge Harrison arrived at the crux of Logan's claim, the legal principle of accession. She systematically articulated how, under American property law, fixtures permanently attached to land generally become part of the real property and accrue to the landowner. She cited several key precedents, particularly those involving improvements made without proper title or in bad faith. The extensive structures erected on Mr. Reeve's property, she pronounced, her voice echoing in the silent room, including the entirety of Oasis Serenity Resort, were constructed without the legal consent or rightful title of the true owner. The court finds that the defendant's actions constitute trespass in illegal construction, and therefore, under the doctrine of accession and relevant legal precedents, all improvements made to the land, including the resort complex, now legally belong to the rightful landowner, Mr. Logan Reeve. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Stephanie Ward slumped in her chair, her face draining of all color. a low, guttural cry escaping her lips. Thomas Sterling buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking in defeat. The investors, who had once been so eager to shake Stephanie's hand, now glared at her with a mixture of fury and despair. Logan Reeve, beside Eleanor Vance, remained impassive, but a flicker of something akin to quiet triumph passed through his eyes. Eleanor, however, allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile of satisfaction. The judge continued, outlining the additional rulings. The stop work order was now a permanent injunction, preventing Stephanie and the HOA from any further involvement with the property. Furthermore, the court awarded Logan substantial damages for the trespass, legal fees, and the environmental rectifications needed from the construction, further crippling the already devastated HOA and its investors. She also noted the severe negligence of the local planning agency, ordering a full investigation into their approval processes, a ruling that would undoubtedly lead to further governmental scrutiny and potential reforms. The immediate aftermath was chaos. As the verdict was read, reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones thrusting. Stephanie Ward, unable to compose herself, had to be escorted out by her attorneys, her face a mask of utter devastation. The cries of angry investors followed her. "You ruined us! Stephanie!" one man bellowed, his voice raw with betrayal. Everything gone. Logan Reeve, in stark contrast, emerged from the courtroom to a swarm of respectful, almost reverent media. He allowed Eleanor Vance to speak for him. "My client, Mr. Logan Reeve, is a man who believes deeply in the sanctity of private property rights," Eleanor stated calmly, her voice resonating with authority amidst the clamor. "This verdict is a testament to the enduring power of the law and a stark reminder that ambition, no matter how grand, cannot supersede legitimate ownership. Mr. Reeve will now focus on assessing his newly acquired assets and determining the best path forward for Oasis Serenity." Her statement was a subtle but powerful twist of the knife, the resort. Once Stephanie's Oasis Serenity was now simply Oasis Serenity, a piece of property belonging to Logan. In the ensuing weeks, the story became a national sensation. Logan Reeve, Imam, the enigmatic silent landowner, became a folk hero to many, a symbol of justice served to the arrogant and powerful. His meticulous planning, his patience, and his strategic use of legal loopholes were lauded as a masterclass in foresight. He was approached by countless media outlets for interviews, all of which he respectfully declined, maintaining his signature air of mystery. He did, however, allow a carefully curated statement to be released, emphasizing the importance of thorough due diligence in all business dealings and the unwavering protection of property rights. Stephanie Ward's world, meanwhile, imploded. The HOA was dissolved, its assets seized to cover the mounting legal costs and damages. Investors, facing personal bankruptcy, initiated their own cascade of lawsuits against Stephanie, accusing her of gross negligence, mismanagement, and outright fraud. Her professional reputation was shattered beyond repair. She retreated from public life, her name forever synonymous with one of the most spectacular and costly blunders in recent real estate history. The engineers and contractors, though not held liable for ownership, faced intense scrutiny and lost significant contracts due to their association with the disgraced project. The local planning agency underwent a massive overhaul, its internal processes tightened, its reputation permanently stained. Logan Reeve, now the undisputed owner of a multi-million-dollar luxury resort, embarked on a new chapter. He brought in a top-tier management team, not to flaunt his wealth, but to strategically leverage his newfound empire. He rebranded Oasis Serenity, renaming it the Sentinel, a subtle nod to his vigilant guardianship of the land. He implemented strict environmental protection policies, addressing the minor damages caused during construction, showcasing a commitment to responsible land stewardship that Stephanie had so flagrantly ignored. The resort, under his quiet guidance, reopened its doors, not as a symbol of reckless ambition, but as a testament to the quiet power of unwavering principle and meticulous planning. Logan, the former asset investigator, had transformed from the trespassed upon to the shrewd, silent owner of a valuable enterprise. He hadn't sought revenge in the traditional sense, but justice, a profound rebalancing of scales. He had allowed greed and carelessness to build his fortune, turning the very arrogance of his opponents into the foundation of his triumph. The story of Logan Reeve and the Sentinel became a cautionary tale in boardrooms and a whispered legend among land developers. Never underestimate the power of quiet observation, impeccable preparation, and the unyielding force of the law when wielded by a truly patient hand. His victory was complete, leaving no open timelines, only the stark reality of a man who played the long game and won everything. Logan Reeve's dramatic journey, from anonymous landowner to the magnate behind a multi-million-dollar resort empire, has come to a close. This tale of intellect, patience, and justice served prove that sometimes silence is the most potent weapon. Thank you for following Logan's arduous legal battle. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment below to support us.